Andrew Cuomo flares up at the feud with Bill de Blasio. This time, it's over the investigations of the New York mayor. Cuomo, he's denying de Blasio's claims they're politically motivated. Is the governor right? Our panel of attorneys, they'll weigh in as how much politics has to do with investigations. Also, the he said on Long Island. Suffolk County executive demanding the resignation of the DA. We'll talk to a lawyer who's had the inside track on how things work out there. Then, 20 years later, the O.J. Simpson trial still gets a ton of interest and attention. We'll discuss how it's changed things forever when it comes to high-profile cases. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. I'm Richard French. Now, we spent a lot of time, obviously, covering corruption trials lately. Point in any direction, you can probably find one. You got Shelley Silver, Dean Skelos, already convicted and already sentenced. A lot of focus is turning now to New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio. A lot of people thought there may not have been a lot in the beginning, but as this unfolds here, opinions are changing. We've told you about the numerous probes focusing on his administration. They are listed on your screen as we speak. Bill de Blasio, particularly annoyed about the fundraising probe because he says a Cuomo appointee at the Board of Elections recommended bringing a criminal case against him. There's more. Mayor also basically said this whole thing is politically motivated. And here's a quote directly. When you see something done in this kind of fashion, when you see an inappropriate leak, when you see the law being misconstrued in such an obvious way, of course it begs the question of motivation. Now, Andrew Cuomo, he wasn't going to let that one go. And this is what he had to say yesterday.
The only thing I know about the investigations on the mayor is what I read about in the newspaper. And look, it may all be a grand conspiracy against him, but then the U.S. Attorney, the Attorney General of the state of New York, the Manhattan District Attorney are all part of a conspiracy.
That's a pretty good line. So who's right here? Could this be politically motivated? Or in this particular case, you got too many investigating bodies with too many different agendas, if you will, here, that this would really work. Well, let's bring in our panel. Jimmy Kasuris is a criminal defense attorney in Manhattan. He sits on the board of directors of the New York City Criminal Bar Association. He also frequently lectures at New York Law School and the bar associations in both Queens and New York City. Doug Von Oist, founding partner of Carson Von Oist, focusing on corporate misconduct, and selected by the Legal 500 as one of the most influential trial lawyers in the nation, and also a former ADA from a neck of the woods we'll be talking about shortly. Amy Dardashian. Amy's an attorney, a legal analyst, and an Emmy award-winning journalist. And like I say, Amy, these guys can't say that. Okay. Yes, she wins.
That's your weekly line now.
Yes, very nice. Thanks for selling me out. Okay, so politics, you guys have been DAs, ADAs in next to the woods. You heard what de Blasio said. He said, hey, you know, this is all about politics. You know, there's no secret, there's no love lost between the governor and the mayor, even though they share the same party label. But Jimmy, it seemed like Cuomo won the fight with a haymaker when he said, oh, let me get this straight here. You know, I've got basically the U.S. Attorney's Office, I got the DA's office, I got all these different investigating bodies, and they're all doing this at my behest.
It sounds like the prosecutor's argument in so many of our trials when the defense gets up and says everybody's lying, and then the answer is so everybody's conspired against you. But he's got a point. He's got a point. I'm not going to say that the investigation isn't spurred by some kind of political motivation, but obviously several law enforcement agencies have seen fit to take the information and run with it. And I can't imagine that they'd be doing so for nothing more than political reasons, and that there's, you know, no basis to proceed. So I agree with you. It's a point well taken. And
also, it should be noted, the governor himself is under, or at least his administration's under investigation, specifically Joe Percoco, who both worked for him and then worked in a advisor capacity role, certainly during the campaign, and we'll get into that later. But Doug, just a broader thing. You don't even have to attach names to this at all. Are there some times when public officials are under investigation that it's not just about, oh, well, maybe he or she did something wrong, but there's political motivations? We won't get to what's going on in Suffolk till next segment, but obviously you're familiar with that. You're familiar with the city, all you guys. How much does politics play into this?
Well, it's the word politics. I mean, politics plays probably into everything. Listen, criminal investigations constantly, whether it's your neighbor calling up saying this guy's got a really nice boat, how do you get that boat, he must be doing something illegal, or whether it's a political tip, you know,
What do you mean
saying,
by that?
well, yeah. But you know, the reality is, at the end of the day, is there something that's wrong? Is the person doing something wrong? And although it looks political, you know, just because you're investigated by the Attorney General, the U.S. Attorney, DA's office, that doesn't mean you've done anything wrong. The initial tip could have been political. The investigation will bear what it bears, though, at the end of the day.
Have you guys ever been in an office where maybe your boss, the DA, said, hey, I just got a call from fill in the blank here. Let's take a look at this guy. You know, he made the wrong enemy or something else. Not that you're making up facts, but maybe that became a priority because that person made the wrong enemy.
Listen, I've not only heard that, I know colleagues of mine that made enemies in the wrong places were investigated, and some of them, you know, got into trouble. Again, as Doug said, the initial motivation may be quote unquote political, maybe somebody with an agenda, but what follows doesn't necessarily mean that what follows in terms of an investigation and a prosecution is baseless.
Amy, you think the public would be surprised how much behind the scenes goes into not only who's looked at, but also certain cases that seem to, if not outright disappear, fade into the background here because, as in life here, it matters who your friends are.
Well, sometimes it does, but if your friends fear that they're going to get in trouble, then suddenly they're not your friends anymore. I mean, are there other politicians who have siphoned money through the Democratic committees to candidates? Sure, but if you look at what happened with de Blasio, it's so obvious. I mean, I even went to the public website and I looked up the Putnam County Democratic Committee. Okay, over the course of 5 years, maybe they had about $30,000 in donations or contributions. And then all of a sudden, in October 2014, in the span of 2 weeks, there's $700,000 in contributions. And they're all from unions and other people who are connected to de Blasio. Then, within 1 to 6 months later, those unions have contracts with the city. So it's so obvious. I mean,
And
if
the
these
most
people
damning
don't
thing to
rat
me
him out,
is
someone's going to.
they don't even deny it happened. They're like, but that's legal. Now, whether it is or not, I guess we'll
No, it's
decide.
skirting campaign contribution
And certainly
limits.
the letter and the spirit. We don't know about the letter yet, but the spirit of it. This stinks here. And then the questions about where the buck stops. All right, I want to get to another story here about a obviously notable figure. This is across the river in New Jersey. Bridgegate still dragging on. For anyone who thought this was asked and answered, you are very wrong here. A judge just delayed the release of the names of the so-called unindicted co-conspirators. John Doe has so far successfully kept the names secret. So, a couple questions. What could this mean here? And should these names be released, or do the people involved have the right to privacy? I'll get the second part in a second, but explain to the audience first what an unindicted co-conspirator is.
I'm still trying to figure it out. Why are they called co-conspirators? Is this just the prosecutor trying to boost his case? I mean, if somebody's a conspirator, that means that they participating, there was a meeting of the minds, they did something that was illegal, they should be charged. So I think, you know, they shouldn't be conspirators in the first place. And if they are, then they should be charged. And if they're not, then their names should not be released, because then they're going to be tried in the press and their reputation is going to be ruined. But this is not a battle between the First Amendment and privacy. This is just, you know, semantics.
Yeah,
the wrong semantics.
And I'll get into whether, and I heard somebody say this is McCarthyism, but you guys, is there a clearer line to what an unindicted co-conspirator is, or is it still hazy by intent?
There are several reasons somebody is called an unindicted co-conspirator. There could be an informant who has begun cooperating with the government prior to an indictment being issued, and so that person would be referred to in the indictment as perhaps an unindicted co-conspirator, somebody who was complicit but who was not charged.
But then
so,
why wouldn't they strike a plea?
Well, because the government makes the deals that they make. There are times when the
It
government...
has to be approved by a judge, doesn't it?
Absolutely not. The government steps to somebody and says, listen, we have you, we know you did this, you're a more minor player, we're not interested in you, what we're interested in is the people with whom you conspired. Give us information, wear a wire, do what you're going to do, help us build a case, and often those people do get a pass, and it is within the purview of prosecutorial discretion to do that.
And I always thought, Doug, those names stayed silent for the very reason is, as Jimmy said, for the most part, it's people who are playing ball, okay? Why now are the names coming out? And by the way, We don't know who the name is of this John Doe. There are rumors, it could be the governor. Obviously, I'm talking about Chris Christie, and other rumors saying it's not him. We won't know until beginning of June. Nonetheless, why put the name out now?
Well, first off, if it's a grand juries are usually a secret proceeding and you don't get the names of people. So now you have the result of a grand jury. Obviously, if you're in the press, you want to know this because these are public figures possibly that you want to talk about, you want to report on. Also,
But should I know?
Well, listen, you probably should know if there's public figures involved and those people's names are going to come up later on. In addition, if you're a defendant at the end of the day, you have a right to know who's involved with your case, and you have a right to do investigations on those people, and you have a right to put on a defense. And you can't put on a defense unless you know.
The defense was given the names in this case.
Right, but it's a tricky issue because I have to say, if you're a public figure, if you're somebody of significance, then I can understand that there is an abiding public interest in knowing who these people are because we have to vote for them or not vote for them or so on and so forth. But if you're not, then there's something very distasteful.
In a certain way,
as Amy said, you haven't indicted the guy, but now you're going to indict me in the press.
Isn't it kind of in a certain way like a perp walk, which is
absolutely.
Listen, it's good for my business, but they don't need to say, hey guys, show up at the back door at 4 p.m. I'm going to be walking the guy out in cuffs here. You don't need to do that. That's not required by law. It's also not required that you are releasing these names. Again, they haven't been convicted of anything,
They
right?
haven't been charged.
But if it's a public figure, shouldn't I, as the public, have also a right to know if somebody else was participatory in something that at least has been an offense here that charges will be brought?
But that's what the whole problem is with calling someone a co-conspirator and then not giving them the right to a trial and not charging them, but then they're going to be tried in the media. Right, so their reputation will be ruined and they'll never get a chance at a trial, yet they allegedly committed a crime and like Jimmy said, maybe they cooperated with law enforcement so they get a free pass. That's why this is such a messed up system. If they committed a crime, then they should be charged.
Or they have to walk out of their house and have their neighbors looking at them as though they're criminals. They have their bosses who may very well discharge them for conduct that they have not been convicted
But
of.
that's fine,
go
they
back
did
to your
something.
DA
They obviously
days, okay?
did something, right?
Okay, but Doug, you go back
did.
to your ADA days. Should I say, cry me a flipping river? This guy got a deal when the rest of the guys are going to be looking at the inside of a courtroom. Boo-hoo, their name gets out there. They shouldn't have been doing this in the first place.
Right, that's exactly what I was going to say. They're co-conspirators. Nobody's going to say, hey, I want to be indicted so I can clear my name in court. No one's going to say that. Something happened here where they're an unindicted person for some reason, but they are involved. And you have to remember, this isn't like somebody who's the victim of a sexual assault and you're putting their name out there. It's a completely different situation. This is a person that's been involved with what's been alleged.
But the problem that I have is that if you haven't cooperated, then it just may be that they believe that you're a co-conspirator, but they don't have the evidence to prove it. And for you to get outed that way and have to bear those social consequences,
it's that famous line. It's that famous line. Where do I go to get my reputation back? All right,
right.
I want to take a quick break, case. When we come back, DA's under fire, and it's happening in Suffolk County, and it's also happening for a different reason in Brooklyn. Why the people charged with protecting the people and putting away the bad guys are suddenly getting a bad rap themselves.